Ken, when you leave, you still have quorum, right?
Yes. All right. It is today is September 8th, 2025. It's 6 p.m. and this is the meeting for the School Building Advisory Committee. So I'll call the meeting to order. The next item on the agenda is public comment. Do we have anyone in the public that would like to make a comment? Pam.
Pam Panero, 710 Slocum Road. I was originally planning to make my public comment at tomorrow night's school committee meeting, but other pressing matters also need to be addressed there. So instead, I am speaking this evening. The school committee will still receive my original thoughts by email. I want to thank you for agreeing to live stream this meeting. With the school committee meeting tomorrow, it's important for the community to have timely access to the discussion. I appreciate that this adjustment was made. It sets the right tone for transparency. This committee's August 5th meeting was one of the best I have seen in quite some time. It was productive, informative, and efficient, with clear explanations of what must be done to submit a successful Stage 2 application. That kind of work builds confidence, and it sets the right example of how this process should move forward. This subcommittee has been direct about the realities around parity and costs. The shift from an $8.2 million estimation on last year's CIP list for the elementary school walls to the current $30 to $32 million projection changes the entire conversation. You have acknowledged that, and rightly so. The numbers themselves require a pivot. My concern is not with this subcommittee's work, but with how the broader conversation has unfolded. There still seems to be resistance to accepting the pivot, and if the public doesn't clearly hear why the numbers have changed, trust will erode quickly. That will matter if the district comes back for a future bond. I supported last year's bond, but I had reservations about communication. A year later, we are still at Stage 2, with new vendors correcting work that should have been right the first time. That history cannot be ignored, and it makes openness even more necessary moving forward. The community doesn't have the benefit of all the frequent ongoing conversations that many committee members do. That is why more transparency and public discussion are critical, especially given that we have already had Stage 2 submissions that failed in the past and are now facing tentative litigation related to prior vendors. Those realities make open communication even more important if confidence is to be rebuilt. I agree with the direction of on the middle schools. Greater parity between Davisville and Wickford is fantastic, and I believe the added work at DMS is a good step. Families value their community elementary schools, but the cost changes are too significant to ignore, and the community needs to understand what that means for long-term planning. The subcommittee has recognized this, but the broader conversation hasn't caught up. That needs to happen, and quickly, so people are not caught off guard later. In the end, this isn't just about facilities. It's about trust. The subcommittee has recognized the realities. Now the challenge is making sure those realities are communicated clearly, not only within the school committee, but to the broader community. I urge you to keep pressing for that openness so the community can trust and support the path forward. Thank you.
Mary Warbeck. In terms of parity, I have a question. The new middle school, will it have air conditioning and is Davisville then going to have it? With the increase in temperatures, we're going to have to be thinking about this, and we're doing this extended 20-year plan. We're going to have to be thinking about cooling all the schools. That's one thing. And the other thing is, do you know what is the status of any federal rebates we may have been getting? Do you have any information on that? And also, I wondered if there are any plans to have a revolving fund like Lincoln does, with the reimbursements or rebates, which are then invested and used in future school improvements. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak? No? Okay. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from August 6th. Is everyone able to review those minutes? Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of August 6th, 2025?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays?
I'm just going to abstain because I wasn't here.
Okay. All right, that brings us to the main topic for tonight. It's the review and approval of the Stage 2 fourth addendum submission. So we have our architects and our OPM here. They'll provide us with a presentation for tonight, and then we'll have a discussion.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Sam Bradner with Peregrine Group. I think I've seen and met with all you folks at previous meetings. Tonight we have team members from Perkins Eastman, the architect for the new middle school, my colleague Erica Schechter, and team members from DBBW Architects, who are the architects for the CIP work. What we're going to do tonight is you all have a copy of this presentation in front of you. We're going to walk through this hopefully efficiently. We know there's going to be a lot of questions. So there's a lot of data in here. You know, the goal for this is kind of a summary of all the work that's been happening in the last 90 days, at least for the team members that just came on in June, in addition to all the work that Perkins Eastman has done before, and really kind of a summary doc of everything that's going to go into the Stage 2 work. I think we're probably over 1,000 pages combined with all the different documents, so we're not going to bring all those this evening and walk through them one by one, but we're going to give you an outline of that work and what the main kind of core information is around pricing, around status of design, and then how we move forward with the next steps. So just going to the first couple slides, activities to date. I think a lot of the folks in this room know the things that we've been doing for the last 90 to 120 days. For the new team members, it's been a lot of rapid ramp up, trying to get our hands around the CIP work, but then also catch up to the work that Perkins Eastman has been doing as well. You guys can look at this, ask questions at your leisure. The next page is a summary of one of the first things that we did when we were brought on board was we had a meeting with RIDE on June 11th. And RIDE issued this memo to us basically telling us the ingredients that they wanted included in the addenda that was going to come in now next week. So what you see on this page here is basically an overview of the elements that RIDE said they are going to be requiring in order for us to kind of consolidate from previous rounds of comments, but also kind of reorganize some of the data that they've seen in the past and also be able to kind of launch forward with the new information. So what you'll see is some repetition for each of the buckets of the schools. So the new middle school, which was already much further along through the addenda process. So RIDE really wanted to focus on anything that had changed since the previous addenda, then updating the schematic design package, which we'll talk about in a little bit, the CHIPS checklist, which is really the focus on sustainability for the buildings, updated cost estimates, which are really one of the most important things that we've been doing over the last 4 to 6 weeks, and then how does that all roll into the project budget. Take that same list and apply it to the CIP. However, as this body knows, we've spent a lot of time kind of reorienting and reprioritizing where that CIP list was going to go, really the direction that we received from this group 2 meetings ago. We did the update at the last meeting. We've also been doing interim updates with your fellow school committee members. And then it's really just kind of culminating a lot of that information all into one cohesive document so that when RIDE gets it, it makes sense, it's logical, and they can kind of follow through everything. One of the key pieces that, and this isn't the full readout here, but one of the things that they wanted to see was what they call a crosswalk document. How do we kind of link the previous submissions to this new submission? So this spreadsheet here outlines the major components of what a Stage 2 typically has in it, the kind of the main chapters or the main goals of it. And what we're trying to do with this document is really illustrate to them, here are the elements that are static from the previous submissions and which submission that was. Here are the ones that are actually being updated in this submission specifically. So you'll see there's the top tier is for a Wickford Middle School and what the status is of all those documents and where they're going. And then down below, the same thing with the CIP. This will be backed up with a significant amount of narrative, but this is just kind of a dashboard of what the status is of all these major components that are going to be going in. So RIDE, we've reviewed this with them. They liked seeing this as kind of a dashboard. and then they understand that there's going to be a narrative backup that's going to sit behind us and kind of walk through any of these sections that have changed since previous addenda or the most recent addenda. We're gonna talk about this document quickly, but then we're gonna come back to it at the end. One of the requirements for the stage 2 addenda is gonna be an overall finance plan and a cash flow. So what we have here on the top tier are the core projects that we're gonna walk through today, what we're calling the base projects. And then down below, what we have is what are the alternates or the alts for the other, for projects that, kind of parsing out the budget and the scope across these different projects as we looked at them. More heavily focused on the CIP when you look at kind of the volume of the various projects that are in those line items. And then what we've done is a rough mapping of what we think that drawdown cash flow schedule will look like over the term. This is meant to be conceptual. These numbers will change as far as the cash flow goes, what fiscal year you'll be burning which amount of dollars. And I know the manager and their team are going to be very interested in this as we start to get this information more refined and working on when you'll be doing bond placements, how much that drawdown will be, when we're going to need funds to kind of come back in and support the projects. And then down below in the funding summary, and this is something that's really static since the original submission, is you have two main sources of funds. First, the bond placement, or the bond that was approved last year, that's the 137.2. And then, as part of your work last year, before you made your submission, both I don't know if the building committee voted on it, but the school committee, working with the town council, established the revolving loan fund for capital reserves. So the idea behind that is that you'll have recurring dollars that can be spent on any given fiscal year, submitted back into RIDE for reimbursement. Those reimbursements for housing aid can then come back and kind of replenish that revolving loan fund in order to kind of support that process. So when we look at the total that's available through those two sources, that's that bottom line at the bottom of the spreadsheet, which is your $141.45 million. That's been our guidepost for how much project costs we can kind of support in this main submission. And then we'll talk through the second tranche of projects, which are really on the alts list. Some of those are on the outside looking in, either on some of the elementary schools and the middle school, or even some of the alts that are actually being proposed for the new middle school. And again, we'll go back to this document at the end so we can certainly talk through it in much more detail. The next document that we have is our overall project schedule. This is a collapsed version of a work session that we did with a pretty large group of folks here about a month ago. And really the goal for this is A, it's a requirement for RIDE, but B, it also is going to tell the tale about when these various projects can happen, because that timeline is also going to influence cost. So some of the projects that are going to happen over multiple phases at, say, some of the existing schools, when we map those out over several years, we have to apply escalation for projects that are happening many years out, and that actually has to be included in the overall budget. So what you'll see here is walking through kind of the major components. The stage 2 addenda 4, which is what we're about to wrap up this week. Then you'll see the Wickford Middle School project starting on line 15 with the overall design, approvals, and anticipated construction duration. And then we do that same approach for the high school roof, and then all of the other CIP work in the various elementary schools and Davisville Middle School.
And I would never do this except that I'm leaving, so I do apologize. You don't want to stop mid-presentation.
No, please.
Don't spend a lot of time on this, but could you or someone give me a 2-minute recap on what your understanding is of the $4.2 million in revolving funds on page 5?
Sure. I mean, what we understand, and that was kind of a given when we stepped to the table, Ralph, so that had been kind of an established source of funding that, again, would have that ability to revolve those monies in and out on an annual basis, with housing aid reimbursement coming back to kind of replenish that source.
It's funds that we're going to have to make sure that we put away in the school department. So if we have revenue, any savings year to year, moving that from our fund balance into a set-aside line item for the
And that's how I understood it. So it's not housing aid reimbursement.
No.
Right, okay,
Any of the because any of the
so maybe I missed
No, that's okay. No,
so
that's
any
okay.
of the reimbursement that's coming back for this through the bond is going to.
Yes,
that.
because when we did the fiscal impact, and again, we're looking forward to working together and getting done whatever we have to get done. I mean, we know that. We have a partnership here. But I know we did the fiscal impact, we assumed that the reimbursement, as it's always been done over the last 20, 30 years in every community, is it lessens the impact to the taxpayer. So if the annual payment is $2 million and reimbursement's $500,000, it's a $1.5 million hit on the budget. So that's how I understood it. So that I want to make sure that I understood it properly. Because if not, I want to get back to the drawing board with our finance director.
Nothing has changed from that.
Okay.
My misunderstanding.
No, not at all. No, I completely understand. Again, I just didn't want to. I wrote that down to meet with the finance director, and I'm saying, let me just ask the question. So.
And we've seen it done a couple different ways. So certainly,
Okay.
however you guys pre-establish that process,
Sounds great.
That makes sense. We don't claim to be finance folks.
No, that's all right. Whatever. And the state, the administration knows we're here to work with them. I just wasn't sure what the thought process was.
Any other questions on that specifically, though?
No, I just wanted to catch that before I left.
Great.
Thank you.
And then just on the schedule, there are 2 line items you'll see highlighted there. What we did do for the middle school project specifically, because that is a ground-up new construction project, we looked at 2 different ways to build it. There's 2 to 3 major ways to kind of do any major construction process. Construction manager at risk, which is a team member you bring in early and they help you through the pre-construction period. Design bid build, or GC, is where you basically do all your design work and then you go out to bid at the end and then you get bids in and then you make a decision based on cost. Or design bid build, design build, which is not one of the options that we evaluated here. We're not picking an option here. What we're trying to do is just evaluate the pros and cons that we'll be talking about with this committee after we make the submission about the different ways for you to procure. So these just give you kind of potentially different start and finish dates. And again, once we get into the process with this group and with the working group and the administration, we'll kind of go through that. We'll provide that information out and then allow for that selection to be made. And that's something we'll want to do in probably the next 30 days after we make our submission next week, because that'll be an important step. If we do decide to go construction manager at risk, that's something that we would want to go out on the street with early for an RFQ, bring that team member in and kind of get them involved in the process so that they're on board for when we really get to the conclusion of the next round of design, which is late in the fall. So again, here's just a high-level illustration of how that could work, and then some of the variations that we have on timeline for that.
Sam, can you
Yes.
also, just for the public, just remind everybody, and maybe it's on here, but my eyes are so bad. Can you just?
It's small, too, so I apologize.
I know, it's my eyes. Can you just remind everybody, even though we submit to RIDE in September, we're not going to get an answer back.
Correct.
For a while.
So what they'll do is they'll start their evaluation soon after that submission. Technically, you won't see an approval until December of 2025. Now, what you will see is comments coming back and kind of an iterative process where they're going to be submitting comments back, asking questions, getting clarifications back in. So typically, our experience is you start to get a better understanding of where they're leaning on the application. That's probably October into November, as they're getting ready to prepare their package for the vote that will happen with the council in mid-December. That date is always a little bit fluid, but usually they target around the 15th of December for that final step.
Yeah, just so that the public is not thinking we submit and then
Right.
by October 1st we're going to have an answer.
Right, and I would say also that we made an assumption that that pencils are not being put down while we wait for that approval process, because if you do, that's going to add another 3 to 4 months to your time frame. So that's when we did our scheduling exercise with the whole team. That was definitely one of the things that we said, okay, we're going to keep proceeding because we've got to make sure that we can start to hit some of these broader time frames and try to bring some of that escalation costs, either bring it back or at least try to keep it in check based on the overall schedule.
Thank you.
All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it over to the Perkins team, to Mark and Tina, to walk through some of these documents. They're going to look very similar to what you guys saw last month. So we certainly can spend as much time as you want on them, but they're really here as a reference so that the building committee can recall what we talked about at last month's meeting and kind of understand the premise of the overall design approach, and then we'll talk through the cost estimate and the budget.
Okay, thanks. Okay, go ahead. So, as Sam said, this is the design that we showed at the last meeting for most of you who were probably here. You see the building, the parking strategies, the fields, the multipurpose field and baseball field that are behind the building. Softball field is to the south of the building. A couple of things that we'll talk about that have sort of evolved since Addendum 3. We did rotate the building. That was to improve the orientation of the classrooms so that they're getting the right sun from the north and south, not from the east and west. And a couple other things that came out of some programming sessions that we had with the leadership. We had pulled the music, at Addendum 3, we had the music classrooms underneath regular classrooms, which wasn't ideal. We did, yeah, thanks. So we pulled those out. Sorry, I'll get up and just point to that. So as the building rotated, we pulled the band and choral out from underneath this classroom bar. That was to help, so that noise that comes from those rooms wouldn't sort of telegraph up above to the second floor. And the other thing that we did was there was a request for an additional science lab so that we had an even distribution of science labs. So we increased the building slightly from a regular classroom to accommodate the science labs. Other than that, this design, which we showed last time, is the design we submitted to our cost estimators. I'm happy to stop and answer questions if there's anything. And Tina's going to go through a little bit of the CHIPS checklist.
Yeah. So the next slide is the Northeast CHIP scorecard. This actually has not changed too much other than one targeted point that I'll just mention. So they asked us to do an update, and there is just, you can see the little, oh sorry,
It's okay.
the highlighted number there for the views. We did have a targeted point for that. Though we did put that into the maybe category as we develop the design, we have less glazing as sort of an economical view to the project. So that is the only change to the checklist.
Now
You want me to go through that?
now the fun stuff. No, go for it.
Okay, thank you. So essentially, as you see here highlighted, our cost estimate came in at $59.4 million. So what that includes, and we'll go through that, we have looked at alternates that Sam talked about, but this is the building itself, the parking, the driveways,
All the site circulation.
all site
Yeah.
circulation, everything.
Directly adjacent to the building.
Yeah, so, and this is the construction cost. So this is not all in, and we'll talk about that, but that's where we're at with the construction costs, $59.4 million.
Yeah, and what backs this up is about 30 to 40 pages of detailed line-by-line estimating that will be part of the overall submission available to the folks at the building committee. We didn't bring copies of it this evening, but we certainly can issue them out to anybody who's interested. We went through multiple rounds of reconciliation with both all the disciplines that worked with the Perkins Eastman team, so their site team, their mechanical, electrical, plumbing team, their structural team, reviewing quantities based on what the design team believes the scope to be, and then the estimator to make sure that they're all talking the same language on volume, on linear footage, on size, on all those kind of things. What you see in that top tier is all the trade costs. And then down below, you see the typical markups that we would see for a project of this type. So you have design contingencies that get you from today until the end of design. And then you have overhead and profit for the builder. And then you also have escalation based on, this is in today's dollars, and then they escalate out to usually the midpoint of construction to make sure that you're allowing for those costs that are going to happen between now and when you go out.
So just to add on to that, so the design contingency we carry because we're at schematic design, so we've only drawn this much, and ultimately we'll draw this much. So they have to carry contingency simply because they don't have all the detail there. So that's something we've discussed with them, and we feel pretty comfortable where we're at. And hopefully you'll see that come down as more and more detail comes into the drawing. The other thing is that on escalation, we did actually break it into two parts here, just because the duration of the project, right? So you carry escalation to the midpoint of construction, but because it'll be phased over a long period of time, the building comes first, so that has a different midpoint than the fields. So there's just a little bit of a nuance. We're really looking for savings and looking to be as accurate as we can be at this point.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Why is it listed that the existing building demolition is by others? Is that not included in the price?
Yeah, so Ryan has I think a somewhat weird way of doing their budget. So on the next page, you'll see demolition and abatement are carried below the line, actually on the page after the one you're looking at. So we'll walk through that. For some reason, I don't know why, but that's how they do their setup. So you always carry them below. What we did get from the estimator was the demolition cost, and then we, working with the hygienist and the environmental team who walked all the buildings, they gave us their estimate on the abatement side. So those are carried, just not in that estimate from Alana. Ultimately, the contractor would own all that scope.
That's
just how it
that was
is.
what I thought. Okay, thanks a lot.
All right. So Mark and Tina are going to walk through alts. However, I just want to give a kind of a 101 on alternates, just so everybody kind of understands them as best you can. So what Mark kind of walked us through was what we wanted to do was get to a base cost of a building that would be functional. You can turn on the lights when it's ready to open up the doors, and the building will function as intended. How we look at budget management are through a couple different things. First, value engineering, which are things that we say, okay, maybe we want to change the flooring from this to that. That could save us $10 a square foot on that flooring. Or maybe we look at a different ceiling tile, maybe we look at a different finish. So value engineering is things that you actually value engineer and value management out of the project. Alternates, which is the page that we're looking at now, are things that will continue through the design process, some all the way through to the end. Some we'll have to make decisions on as we go through the process, as a way to kind of manage the overall budget. We're not saying one should be in or one should be out. What we're saying is they're not included in this base cost today. And we know that some of these things are very important to the community from a programming standpoint. But we wanted to make sure that we can kind of give you that base building cost and then what the adds would be in order to bring some of these elements in. So we spent a lot of time working with the estimator on these to kind of make sure that they accurately represented the scope of work. And then these will be decisions that we have to make as we go forward. So I'll let Mark walk through, or Tina walk through the numbers.
So the first under this title, procurement, is the construction management, which Sam talked about, I think, a little bit earlier this evening. So to bring in a construction manager at risk early on in the project who will provide pre-construction service, and there really is value added there, but there's also a cost associated with that. So we put that into an alternate package if we wanted to go for it. And I think after this we can talk about the advantages of going with a CM at risk versus going with a design bid build. The other category in procurement is a project labor agreement. I think that is common for schools in this area, but it does again come with a cost, so we're carrying that as an alternate.
And we know that decision has not been made yet by this body, but we wanted at least to understand from the estimator what they believe that premium would be.
Right.
So a question on the project labor agreement,
Yeah.
based on a couple of projects that I was involved in the past. So if you didn't have that figure in there, wouldn't you be adding in something else for the lack of a PLA? In other words, potential stop work, potential, in other words, PLA, and I'm just, if you wouldn't, please let me know.
Yeah.
But I know that I've been on one project that didn't have a PLA a long, long time ago, and then two projects after that did. And I know what we had to put up with the non-PLA that added timing, stop work, added time to the project. So I'm just wondering if you were advised that we were not doing a PLA, would you be adding something in for the lack of a PLA, or would you not?
And we're not making our call on this at all.
Oh, no, I know.
Yeah, so
that's
we
what I'm asking. If we didn't have one, would you be adding something else in the add-on?
So it's a good question, Ralph. I mean, I think there's a qualitative side to non-PLA versus PLA, and I would say most of the school projects that we work on have a PLA. and we've worked with kind of trade leadership on a lot of those throughout Rhode Island. This is purely a quantitative assessment by the estimator to say this is what we think would be the uptick to go from, say, a prevailing wage floor of cost profile for labor to an exclusively union floor for labor. Yes, with a non-PLA, you certainly introduce some variabilities with expiring CBAs. You have other kind of quantitative and qualitative components that I think would all have to be part of the feasibility study that this body and the community would have to do in order to determine would it qualify. I think it would, just based on the kind of the overall project size, complexity. I think that this would check the box for at least being eligible for a PLA, and then it's really up to the various folks at the table to kind of say, yes, we want to use that as part of the project. So yeah, there are a lot of components to it, and we don't prepare those studies, but there's a lot of, usually there's several attorneys in Rhode Island that do those. They do them a lot, and they go through the prescriptive requirements that or questions that have to be answered in order to see if you're eligible for it or not.
Perfect.
Including, labor disruption, expiring CBAs, workmanship, complexity, schedule, all those kind of things.
Thanks.
Okay, so on the site alternates, we have 4 categories. So the softball field improvements, that's the existing softball field to the south of the site. Improvements to that field. The multi-purpose and baseball fields, those are the 2 fields that will be behind the school, where currently where Wickford Middle School sits today. The outdoor learning classroom, so we had carried amount for outdoor learning area just to the north of the building, and then an additional 25 parking spaces. I believe we're carrying 75. This would bring it up to 100 roughly, and that's something we would work with the school and work with you all on if that was necessary to go to 100. So 100 is sort of gets everybody there parked. There are other strategies for dealing with parking, for events and so forth that we could do that would save costs. And it's also something we know that RIDE is always looking for. They would rather have a minimum amount of paving on the site for environmental reasons. So that was another alternate that we were putting on the list. Obviously, these are things that are a high priority for the project. So these would be, I'll say that I'm sure everyone would agree, these would be some of the things that we would absolutely be looking to work on value management so that they become part of the base project. Net zero energy is another one. It comes at a significant cost. We know it's important, but we felt it was the right strategy to put those into the alternates. And that's really 2 bigger components here. One is the geothermal field, which would be underneath the parking, and the other is the photovoltaic panels on the roof. So it's a RIDE requirement or a CHIPS requirement that the building is PV ready, so that the conduits are there, the structure for the roof carries the PVs. Not necessary to actually install them. There's a lot of variables to consider on photovoltaics. It's dynamic in how the market changes on that, leasing versus the district owning those and the quality and the science behind the PVs. So I think this is one that would make sense to put as an alternate.
So you had mentioned the PVs are a requirement of RIDE.
The building has to be PV ready. So there's a little bit more structure that would go into it. The conduits to run the wires, the space to have the system in the building needs to be there, but not necessarily the purchasing of the PV.
I find that ironical because it's my understanding, if I'm wrong, please let me know, that RIDE has determined that this will not receive reimbursements. Is that correct?
The geothermal portion.
The geothermal portion will not receive reimbursements.
Yeah, I don't know if they reimburse for the PV either.
Yeah,
I was of the understanding that they weren't.
Yeah.
At one of the meetings, so I just find it surprising that they're requiring us to be PV ready.
Yeah.
And again, this is well beyond my pay grade,
Right.
so if I'm not making sense, let me
Yeah.
know. But they're required us to be PV ready, but yet they don't reimburse us on the PV system, the geothermal.
Yeah.
That's so we can look for reimbursements and rebates. Reimbursements through the rebates through state and
But not the 35%.
not the 35%.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think they want you to be equipped, and then if you make a decision to add it later, then the building's ready and you wouldn't have to kind of retrofit it in. I'd say so far the schools that we've done, I don't think any have added, that they've all been PV ready. I don't think any of them have added PV yet. But that is really a town decision. You know, you guys have a lot of rooftops. Do you go out to RFP or RFQ to a developer to bring in PV for all your rooftops, which is a better way to buy it, I think. But again, that's a procurement and kind of a policy decision by the district and the town, whether they want to do that or not.
The next category of the alternates is for the buildings, screening at the rooftop equipment. This is not a technical requirement, but it's kind of an aesthetic thing. We actually think that we'll probably be able to locate that rooftop equipment so that it's not something that you see from the street and minimize the view angles there. But it does come with additional costs if we were to carry that. So we felt that was another good category for alternate. The brick instead of metal panel. We had originally thought that perhaps the metal panel siding, which is, the building is primarily brick, we had thought the metal panel might actually be a cost savings. It turned out to be not the case. So we're currently carrying all brick building, but we did feel the need to put that into the alternates because the base drawings do show a mix of brick and metal panel. Building infrastructure. So these are something that's, I'm not sure I would characterize these purely as a mad alternate, but they are costs that are outside of the base model, so to speak. So lightning protection system, I think that's something we need to do a little bit more engineering on, but ultimately is a choice, I think, for the district to make, as well as a generator. You don't necessarily need to have a generator, but it is something that a lot of districts do choose to do. Not necessarily to be a full shelter, but to be able to run refrigeration and things like that, which wouldn't normally be part of the base. Something that we'd certainly look to include, but was a good candidate for alternate. And then finally, furnishings. The furnishings were currently, it's not that these items are not in the project. Those are the lockers, kilns for the art room, the equipment for the theater, so lighting and curtains and so forth. They're carried in the FF&E budget, in the furniture budget, which is a separate bucket for RIDE. It's a strategy that we're entertaining. It was something that actually RIDE encouraged us to do at Addendum 3. They feel like the FF&E budget is generous and that it can carry some more than just the typical desks and chairs and so forth. But it's something we'll keep an eye on because it is a cost, and we wouldn't want to find out that we went over on the FF&E budget. So anything that we can do to get that back into the project would be a help. And then this is the value management that Sam mentioned. So right now it's relatively small. There's just a couple $100,000 and some simple ones off the top of our head with polished concrete at art and cafeteria. That's a finish that we do often in lieu of having tile or vinyl or other finished flooring. Sealed concrete at the stairs, also similar, something that we've done successfully. The deck at the gym, so we had originally, I think, had the acoustic deck, which is a perforated deck to help with the acoustics in the gym. It's something that we're carrying as a potential value management right now. I think that's something we'll continue to look at. There are other ways, less costly ways of improving acoustics in the gym. And a lot of that has to do not just about the athletics or sports, but oftentimes gyms are used for assembly and things like that, and so we want to have the acoustics be okay in there. And then we do currently in the design had a canopy that goes across the front of the building for when students are queuing and waiting for the bus or queuing up in the morning. It's nice to have, but not absolutely necessary. So we're carrying that as a potential value management strategy. Then underneath that, we have targeted just as a TBD, other things that we could look to value engineer or value management. And the reason why we can't say that right now is that really requires us to do much more detailed drawing. So thank you.
Sorry.
I'll
Okay.
talk to you tomorrow. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Kim.
So we would absolutely, going forward, continue to look for savings. But right now, without changing the drawings, these are the strategies we can do as sort of line items with the current cost estimate we have. As we move forward into the next stage, we would continue to look for ways of savings that are much more embedded in the design of the building.
Yeah, and I think just a summary on estimating for those who don't do this every day of the week. Cost estimates are only as good as the input, right? So right now we're at a 20-25% level drawing. At schematic design, which is in another few months, we're going to be at 30-35%. Design development, 50%. So as the plans get more robust and more refined, the estimates get more focused. So some of the reasons, but each time you're going to likely come in high, and then we're going to have to go through a value engineering and value management and all evaluation process. So this will happen 3 more times before we actually get to final construction documents. So there's a lot of work. We will make suggestions and recommendations that some will be easy, some will be more painful. And each time we're going to do those, but hopefully as we get to the end, we've kind of made all the hard decisions around the size of the building, finishes, major components, so that we're really settled into a number that we think can work and will work in the marketplace. All that kind of culminates, if we can go one more page, Erica, in the RIDE budget form. So this is a roll-up of probably about 50 lines of budget that we have on our side. And I do apologize for the small font. This is the largest one we'll have. This is the best, the most legible in the document. But what RIDE does is they basically categorize out and make you get very specific on which buckets you put these costs in. So you can see up top, hard costs. That is slightly different than what you see on the bottom line on the page before. That's because of how they parse out some of their costs. So you'll see a little bit of differential there. That's the biggest part of your cost structure. Usually that's in the 80 to 85% of your total project cost. Soft costs represent all your project team, your owner's costs, your contingencies, your cost to work with Rhode Island Energy, your cost for your testing agency, your cost for your commissioning agent, all those components. And then down below are your other costs. So just following up on the discussion that we just had, in there you have furniture, fixtures, and equipment. You have all your tech. Those are based on a per student allowance. So those are predetermined numbers just based on the population of your school. So those multiply out to the 400 students that is the design criteria. And then down below, what we talked about earlier is that's where your demolition and abatement kind of come into play. So they sit down below the line. All those roll up to hit that 72.4, just under $72.5 million. I'll pause there for any questions specifically on the middle school, or we can wait till the end if there's no pressure either way. Okay. All right. Now for the even more complicated stuff. I'm going to turn it over to Ed, and we're going to walk through the CIP, again, kind of picking up on our conversations previously, and we're going to follow a very similar pattern to what we just went through, but we're going to bring it, building by building as we go through the CIP process.
Hello, everybody. The process was exactly the same, and I think most of what you'll see tonight is exactly the same in terms of the scope that we presented previously, both this committee and the school committee. Again, the refocus with the reprioritization was to focus on the roof replacement in all buildings except Davisville, the parity between the middle schools, and the stabilization of the elementary. And that sort of translates into 3 discernible projects. I'm going to try and take what has been discussed as a list for a very long time and make it a project. So we'll have a package for the high school roof. That's the first one that we want to get out and try and utilize next summer for. A, because it's a top priority, and B, we're trying to reduce the amount of escalation that we tie up with some of the largest projects, and that seems to be one that we can get moving quickly. The second is the elementary roof replacement and the improvements, which we'll get into in a minute, and then the third is the Davisville project. The idea is that all of these projects are summer work, and I'm using that term loosely because the high school, we want to extend that shoulder season because of the scope of work that's involved in one summer from May to September. The elementaries, we tried to stagger between 4 one summer and 4 another. And then Davisville is actually every summer for 4 years, just based on the extent of the scope. We did assume, just a couple of footnotes here, that the all this work will be delivered with the traditional design bid build. In the case of Davisville and the elementaries, it'll be general contractor. That's the way the prices were developed. And in the case of the high school roof, we're looking to have the roof contractor act as the prime because it's 99% roof related. He'll coordinate the work with the mechanical, electrical, plumbing subcontractors relative to the roof related items that need to be addressed. Again, it's trying to maximize the bang for the buck. Next slide.
I have one question on the last slide. You said
Yes.
Davisville is going to be design bid build.
Traditional design bid build.
Would you do 4 separate projects or one contractor?
One contractor, 4 summers.
And we did give that one at least a consideration on CM. I mean, that's got a CM,
that's what
potential, I think. We did have them, we didn't include it in here, but we did have them give us the premium for CM. And I think that is something that we want to continue to discuss as well. Complicated enough, multiple phases, the continuity of a CM coming in early, thinking about how those phases work. Certainly something to be considered, but right now it's priced at least as that GC lump sum
bid. We had the unenviable task of trying to go through all buildings and come up with the applicable lead.
Can you guys read this?
Checklist.
Everybody pick a
Cheaters in the
sheet.
car.
So the approach here, not that I expect to go through all of this or for you to read it, is most of these projects don't trigger major renovations. So we're trying to maximize the amount of points that we can get based on what's either in the building now or what we have planned. Davisville seems to have the most impact. So Davisville, we were trying to target major renovation threshold. We did make it. Depending on where we end up, that may or may not be the final, but we're close. I think the story is that there's a way to justify it.
Right. And the meeting some of these requirements actually costs more money. So trying to decide, do you want to try to get to that threshold or not, I think is an important discussion that we'll continue to evaluate. And we'll have to resubmit this checklist at each stage of design back to RIDE. So this will be very iterative as we move through the evolution of cost, design, scope, and prioritization with this committee.
So if you remember the scope of work that we presented the last time, Davisville had sort of a master plan approach. We had no idea how much we could afford. We'll get into it in a few slides, but we priced everything that was on the list. And essentially we came in at over $70 million worth of base bid work. We don't have $70 million available. So realistically, we looked at what in Davisville could be pushed to an ad alternate to deal with at a later phase if money becomes available, to trim the sales to get down to where we needed to be at the 19.6 and change. And I'll walk through that in a minute. But in essence, the high school roof came in a little over $6.3 million. The elementary work in total at all of the buildings, which includes the roofs, the secure entry vestibules, the media centers, and some other miscellaneous work, came in at a total of 29.1. And then Davisville, again, as I mentioned, that target is trying to get back to that 19.6.
And I would say this was all informed by looking at that macro, the cash flow document that we looked at before. We know we've got $141.45 million available. We know the new school is plus or minus 72.5. So we back out of that, that gets us to about 68.9. Then we're trying to filter through that 68.9 and see how we can best deploy that, get a lot of these priorities done, and then what are the things that are going to be kind of future or something that, you know, the community will have to reevaluate as they continue to think about what is the overall plan for, you know, the district.
These slides should look familiar because they're exactly the same as we showed the last time. And I wanted to make that statement because here, the high school roof, it's the same scope that we had anticipated before, replacing all of the area in the hatch, and dealing with some other miscellaneous items. That's all in at that 6.3. These are the correlating budget sheets.
Yeah, and I gave you a separate handout so you could at least read these. So this is each of those sheets for each school. So the front and the back is for each of the schools that Ed is going to walk us through. Just so, again, you understand kind of how the estimated numbers are folding into the overall RIDE project budget. First page, base, second page, all. And that'll be consistent as you kind of walk through these various pages. And you'll see them side by side here in the presentation, and then they're back to back at the side.
You want to explain the escalation?
Yeah, so one of the things that RIDE caps you on is the allowable soft cost as it relates to the hard cost. So allowable, all the non-construction costs, design team, OPM, testing, commissioning, all that in aggregate can only equal 20%, or they at least cap their reimbursement at 20%. Because escalation, in their view, is deemed a soft cost, that actually, instead of being in the construction cost, goes into the soft cost bucket, which I don't agree with that approach, but I'm not right. So what we have here is several of these are tipping that 20% number. So that's a conversation we're going to have with RIDE to say, look, it's escalation because these things are out so far, and that escalation really ramps up as you go over time, is really the thing kind of taking that over. If that was in the construction cost, which is not how they look at it, then you would have, you know, this number would probably be sub 20. It's how they run their budget, which we totally appreciate, but it is something that we're going to have to kind of contend with as we go through that process with them. So, it's not the first time a budget has come in with that, and they're basically they'll say, yeah, we're going to cap you at 20, whatever it costs, but that's how they're going to look at the reimbursement on it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Looking at the roof replacement in this slide, it says 7.65, and then the previous slide said 6.4.
Yep.
That's the construction number.
That's it. Okay.
Yeah.
All the numbers on the rest of the slide
So
are
you take
construction.
the construction estimate plus the escalation.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So it kind of it pulls it apart a little bit differently, and then we have to kind of rebake it into their budget.
So starting back on the scope that we looked at the elementaries, Davisville, the base bid scope stayed the same again. Roof replacement, accessible site roofs, painting, the secure entry vestibule, and then the emergency fund requests that were already executed with the district. The alternate project scope was priced, but we'll get to that in a moment. That's beyond the base bid. Again, the correlating budget worksheets. Fishing Cove, renovate the media center, secure entry vestibule, accessible site routes. We need to do some stair improvements in the 1971 edition, and then the water fountain emergency fund request. It's all base bid. That budget worksheet as well. I'm going to get redundant with the elementaries because the scope is very similar. Forest Park, same thing, the roof replacement, the site routes, painting, the media center, the secure entry vestibule, and some other miscellaneous work. I think in general that's been consistent with the approach to the elementaries based on the pivot that we had back in the beginning of August. And all of these projects totaled that $20-some-odd million. Hamilton, very similar again, except here we're going to replace the gym divider partition. as part of this work. Quidnesset, very similar again. Media center with walls in the middle of the building, secure entry vestibule, the gym divider partition, the accessible site routes. The idea is that these buildings are going to be stabilized and they'll be usable for the foreseeable future. And Stony Lane is very similar again. That sort of rounds out the elementary scope.
So Ed, can I just ask a question?
Yes.
I'm just asking this for maybe others here or the public. So when we look at this document, right, RIDE document has the hard and soft costs. That's an overall cost estimate for the base bid projects
Correct.
for each school.
For each school.
So Stony Lane overall cost is 6.7 million.
Correct.
For the base.
For the base. And in the presentation, you have listed on the page for Stony Lane, when you go to the layout of the building, not this page, what those projects are.
Correct.
Someone says,
What are we
I wanna
getting to
see-
$6.7 million?
I want to see the breakdown.
It's right now.
Right, but I want to see the breakdown for the security vestibule. How much is the security vestibule?
It's all on the cost estimate.
Yes.
All of that is in the packet.
Yes.
It's in the cost
That-
estimate.
So there is we talked about the cost estimate that was prepared for the middle school. There is a separate corresponding cost estimate that was done for all of the CIP work. So cost estimate for middle school was 40 pages.
Some pages.
The CIP cost estimate is 130 pages.
Do we have that we can make available electronically for tomorrow night's meeting?
We certainly do. Yep.
Just
We didn't bring it just because of the
Mhm.
volume of it, but we certainly can.
point of electronically if we can.
We can send it out to you guys, and you guys can share with the committee members. I would say though, I don't know if it specifically says vestibule this cost. Vestibule is spread across multiple trades, so it is not broken out by
I'm not going to
component.
see it as one line
Yeah.
item, but it's.
You're going to see structure, you're going to see finishes, you're going to see HVAC. Those are all for all the components, all the work that's going to happen in the building.
Thank you.
I was also wondering, because I think I looked through everything prior to the meeting, but did we include in here the two $500,000 emergency fund groups of projects? I know that's
We're
not.
including it on the ask based on what RIDE told us we had to do because it's going to come off of the approved total.
Okay, so that's in.
Yeah, so
It's in here, but we have the documentation from
Okay,
the previous approval.
got it. Okay, thanks.
Because they were already approved.
yeah, so we talk about
Right,
it
I
in
just-
the narrative, right?
Yeah,
We talked
just
about it
so
in
that
the narrative, yes.
we all don't forget that there was already an extra
Yes,
500, and then there will be another 500.
correct.
For these elementary school schematic packages, what did you give the cost estimator? Like, what did they actually have for their estimate?
We had demo drawings architecturally, we had new construction showing the extent. We had narratives for the systems, as well as for the finishes and general fit out. So we gave them, I'm going to say somewhere between a conceptual and a schematic level of information that they put these numbers to, and that's the other reason why our design and pricing contingency is a little bit higher, because we were a little bit further behind.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We did try and account for it. And it's very difficult with those lines in the sand, until you get the final engineering drawings, you don't really know. We tried to get a good approximation.
Yeah,
based
there's
on
a
where
lot
we're
of
at.
debate about what was the right design and estimating contingency to carry, say, in the middle school, where we settled at 8% in their cost estimate. We had a long debate with the cost estimators about what to do for the CIP work, because again, those plans
Yes.
not,
More difficult.
yeah. And reno work, right, it's just, there's stuff in there we're not gonna know until we actually open up the walls, never mind going through that, the design process to kind of get to the final set of docs.
The other thing you'll see when you do have the estimate, that escalation that we talked about, based on trying to plan when this work would occur, we tried to get that escalation in line with that proposed construction schedule, so it was more realistic. But they weren't just throwing a dart into the air and saying, 3 summers. Well, when? What 3 summers? Or is it 2 summers? That kind of thing. So we feel confident that it's in the number, and that as we move design through stage 3, we're gonna be able to fine tune that and get that number, more accurate as we get more information.
Or it'll move into the trade costs, right, because it'll be that much
Exactly.
closer to the time of bid.
So Davisville, I mentioned that challenge of, we drew these nice plans, we made this great presentation to you guys for the master plan, and now it's okay, now what can we afford to do? So the area in the dashed line with the red is the media center and the guidance suite renovation, the new main entrance and entrance canopy and secure vestibule, the main office revisions to support that, as well as the conference room that was contemplated, and then the nurses suite renovation as well. So that whole front area is basically all new. That's included in the base bid. We also included renovating all the toilet rooms in the building, repainting the building, first floor locker modifications for accessibility, and then the operable partition removal in the classrooms. A few other things that are part of the scope. New sprinkler system throughout. New mechanical systems in the renovated media center and administration areas. Limited HVAC improvements and electrical upgrades in the rest of the building. Anything that's in yellow here is sort of the change from what we showed you last in order to get back to budget for the base bid. We still have the ADA parking and site routes as part of this on the exterior of the building. We are modifying some select classroom doors, the niches that aren't compliant, and then the emergency fund request as well. We went over the parity on the last slide, but the biggest change is what slid into the add alternate bucket, if you will. The central courtyard improvements, the VRF mechanical system, replacing the cabinet unit heaters and exhaust fans, the building management system, the light control system. When I say those are more the nuts and bolts pieces of it, I think the biggest items in terms of educational changes and upgrades would be the new locker rooms, the first and second floor classroom wing renovations, which correlate to the plan we showed on the previous slide. And most importantly, I think that first floor steam corridor coming from the new main entrance all the way down to the end of the wood shop, where we created new art labs and the technology labs and the robotics labs, sort of showcasing all of that front and center. Since we are not a renovation is new, the FF&E in any capacity on whether it was the elementaries or Davisville Middles was never going to be subject to right reimbursement. It was always wholly on the town. We do think that it's going to be necessary to include that, particularly at the media centers. And also to some extent at Davisville to try and get that parity. If we can't do a lot of the physical changes architecturally and mechanically, then the thing that's going to impact the students and the teachers daily the most is furniture. So
any furniture technology that we include in any of the CIP projects at any of the schools
totally
will
on the
not
town.
be reimbursed.
Correct.
So that's something for us to note, that when we get our approval back from RIDE, and when we see we're not at 100%, we'll know why.
Correct. Those are currently not part of the base bid scope, to be clear. But I do think that if there's money available, that's a good place to spend your money.
And as we move through into stage 3, there may be a concerted effort to say, should we pivot some construction dollars to do more furniture? Because I think to Ed's point, furniture is one of those things that I think is immediately the teaching and learning can benefit from it. It's an immediate improvement to kind of the physical and the emotional space and everything else. So we include an allowance here of $500,000 for tech and $500,000 for furniture in the base bid. Ed did not include it in his estimate. That is that is an allowance. It's not prescribed to a certain number of pieces or where that would be, but we know if we're doing the media center, if we're doing the suite in the front, maybe some other areas, at least we've got some allocation there. Again, these numbers will move. They will be very fluid once we move into stage 3, but we wanted to make sure that we had some kind of allowance just as a baseline for this. Similarly, all the CIPs have, I think, about $325,000 for each elementary school. That's really going to focus on the media center because you'll want to renovate. When you do that renovation, it should be all new furniture in there, all new tech in there. Not a estimated number, but we try to look at previous projects that where we've done media centers for FEI projects and others to see, okay, is that a good kind of target that we can work against? So that is included in the
And we'll continue that design through stage 3 relative to the furniture.
Yeah, I mean, we can renovate a space and make that space look new and bright and engaging for the teachers and the students, but if we're not putting tools in there, then we're not going to have the same impact for them to actually teach and learn.
Exactly.
Can't
Exactly.
do one without the other.
No, particularly at the media center.
Ed, and this is a question for probably you and Mark and Tina. There was a question from Mary earlier about the air conditioning for both buildings, and I assume this would probably be a good time to talk about the air conditioning situation at DMS versus what's going to happen at Wickford Middle.
Well, as you can see, the VRF went to the add alternate list, so it is not included in the base bid scope currently. The system that's there now will remain, and only the renovated areas will have cooling components either replaced or added.
And then Wickford's fully air conditioned.
Okay, thanks.
Obviously, the goal would be to get as much of it on par as we can, but budget limitations are what they are.
Probably should know this, but can you educate me on what the existing condition is for air conditioning at Davisville?
It's, there's some window units. I think there's a rooftop unit in the library currently that has cooling associated with it. The classrooms do not. They're just ventilation with unit ventilators and heat, perimeter heat.
Okay.
Yeah, so pretty limited and kind of pieced together. Yeah, right.
Sort of indicative of the era that it was constructed. We had a long debate about that actually during the cost estimate reconciliation with the estimator.
So we're going to wrap it up with this last page, which is the page we saw before. And just to kind of remind folks about where our sources and uses are. So we talked earlier about we've got $141.4 million of available funding. We take out that 72.5 plus or minus, that leaves about 68.9. So what we had to do in this the top tier of the spreadsheet was make sure that we could fit the core work that we knew was important, the roofs, the roof at the high school, all the roofs at the elementary schools, security vestibules at the elementary schools, and the media centers, and then kind of some of those small miscellaneous items. And that's how we got to kind of how do we size what are the remaining available dollars for the DMS improvements. So you'll see that kind of stacked up there, which gets us pretty close to that total available dollars. So those numbers up top do not include any of those alts that we just walked through. They are the base bid work. Down below, what we've done is we've kind of stacked up all the remaining alts. And part of the reason for this is RIDE does want us to submit for more than what we have, but they also want to make sure that we can actually show a potential source against that. And this is going to get a little bit confusing, but if we take the alts for the middle school off the table just for a second, even though we know that several of those want to be brought back in, the eligibility for the new middle school will probably be just south of $50 million. That is a straight math equation that RIDE does. They take the number of students, they multiply it by the allowable square footage, and then they multiply it by their what they believe the cost per square foot should be for that school. That is typically significantly lower than what the project cost is from our experience. The projects that we've worked on, typically we see about a 2/3, 1/3 of eligibility against total project cost. That's not a perfect science. Ed's working in another community, Mark and Tina are working in another community, those numbers will vary. But that remaining eligibility, the 72.5 minus the 48 plus or minus, those are remaining eligible dollars in your capital stack. It's not additional cash, but what they have asked us to do is prioritize in the alts so that we can ensure that we get additional approvals for some of the alts in the CIP. So that is the reason why we're showing all these alts, and then what we want to make sure is that we do a prioritization to say, okay, what are, of all those alts, and we didn't list them in priority order, we just listed them based on all the math that we just went through with you guys. What would be the preferred prioritization to ensure that we are at least getting as high of an approval as possible, even if you don't have that cash to get to do the actual work. And I know that's a little bit of a confusing math equation to think about in your head. But in the off chance, say that, you know, the community was able to leverage some additional sources of funds, another bond, additional reserves, fundraising, you name it, then you would have already an approval in place for some additional scope that you could potentially bring back in that 5-year window. It may be that you never see another dollar that's available to source that work, and that means that all those alts kind of stay on the outside looking in. But for the purposes of the stage 2 submission, which is again really a funding approval, we want to make sure that we're including at least a priority list that we can say, okay, if all things are equal and we had additional funds, this is how we would look at these at the alt work, which is in that lower tranche of the spreadsheet. So, you know, I don't know how the committee wants to consider that, but we just wanted to make sure everybody kind of understood the overall math on the top, which is really kind of the budgeted work, the work that you have funds for, and then the work on the bottom, which is all those add pieces that were kind of split up in those two different budget breakdowns.
I'm not even sure exactly how to ask that question, but if RIDE says 48 million, just for the sake of RIDE, 48 million is what they think should be the cost for this type of building, considering size and per pupil and all of that. Are any funds that if we have them available that we spend above that, are they therefore not eligible for reimbursement?
Correct. Okay. So they will apply your reimbursement rate to the eligible costs, and that will be the housing aid formula that you guys will go through over the term.
That's it.
Right.
Everything else we're on those.
Yep. And again, not an uncommon, at least from our experience. East Providence High School, $190 million project, 137 was deemed eligible, and they got reimbursed on the 137 at whatever rate they were at.
Yeah.
It was about maybe a little bit higher than a 2/3, 1/3, but kind of that was that split. And
That's
the community
the 2/3,
said
1/3, okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
and the community said, yeah, we want to make sure we build the school that we want. Reimbursement very important, but you know, typically we see that there is a significant differential between total project cost and then what's deemed eligible.
Is that on all projects, or have we seen some that are a little bit closer, maybe on the nose?
I'd say our experience is it's right around that range, and again, maybe it's 60 to 70%, you know, in that float. You know, because a lot of the site stuff is not eligible. You know, a lot of the fields aren't. So a lot of the big high school projects, I don't know what Middletown, I know South Kingstown, I think their eligibility was in the low 100s, and that's a $150 million project. So, you know, I think communities make decisions around making sure that the program is right, and then trying to figure out, again, how they can leverage to the best of their ability that eligibility. And that can be done in different ways, but ultimately typically what we're seeing.
But at least based on the strategy we've discussed with you guys before, with trying to get DMS as a priority, we would think that it makes a lot of sense to rank that as the highest priority if funds come available, to sort of peck away at that master plan to increase the parity and leave the elementaries for another day. But that's one of the decisions that you have.
I think my recommendation for us moving forward is that we have the base bids for the new middle school. We have the base bids for the capital improvement projects. We know that is what we can afford this time. That adds up to that 141 million that we have. 137 being the bond, and then the other 4 being the revolving funds that we will have. The additional about 23 million or so that it's not money we have, but projects we can put on paper to then get eligibility for through ride approval. I think we need to look at some of the adults at Woodford Middle School. I really don't think we can build a school and not have anything in there for the fields. I think we have to consider that. We have to make sure that's in there, that we're getting approval for reimbursement on those fields, so we continue to work that back into the number. We need space outside for physical education, and we need space for the middle school sports. I think the energy, we know that the energy components were not going to be reimbursed, and I think we have other ways that we can go after the renewable energy with rebates from the state that we can work on for that portion of it. And then it's the work that we can do at DMS, so that way we can bring, do work at DMS that we're looking at providing equitable education between the two middle schools. That would be my recommendation. This discussion from others on the committee regarding that?
I'd like to make a motion to accept your recommendation to pass it up to the school committee tomorrow evening, and obviously we can discuss if someone seconds my motion.
Second.
Discussion?
Me.
I hope I worded that right, though. Motion to accept the recommendation of the superintendent on behalf of the building committee to be presented to the school committee.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Duva's recommendation. I'll just say, it's always difficult when the estimations come in because they confront, it's a reality that you see, and that's something that obviously drives the need to make decisions. I think, we received, I think a very clear presentation of the information as best we can, and I appreciate that. I think Dr. Duva's recommendation makes perfect sense given the scope of where we are and given the choices we have in front of us. So I'm in support of it.
We are looking at different projects, but that's based on where we are with cost estimates and the budget that we have. So we're still doing work at every single school like we said we were going to. We just had to reprioritize what those projects are at this time.
And I think we have much more of a better master plan and future goals in front of us. So we're hitting the high school, we're hitting the two middle schools as best we can. We are stabilizing the elementary schools, as you all recommended, and unfortunately we can't do it all. One thing I was disappointed in when the numbers did come back, Ed, you're laughing because you know, was the DMS not being able to do as much with the academic wings, so that we could enhance the educational opportunities and, create more parity there. But of course, money is finite, and unfortunately that's where we're at. But we put that next maybe on the priority list.
Well, and that's where we take this work, and that all becomes part of our 20-year plan that
Right.
we're talking about, right?
Right.
Like, we can't do it all right now, but we need to put a plan forward so we have that roadmap.
Right. And I think for the first time we actually have a roadmap.
And I would suggest that during stage 3, we look for more opportunities to try and make smart moves to include that we could bring back into the fold.
Right, I think that's why it's important to get the approval, because let's just say the roof bid for the high school, it won't come in $2 million less, but just for math, right? That $2 million, if you had another approved project, and DMS was your top priority, right, the alts, then all of a sudden you can say, okay, can we pull in the steam wing? Can we pull in this? Can we pull, or can you do the generator or the,
Right, whatever.
Once you have the approvals, then you can't move monies from one to another, but certainly I think we can start to be kind of more flexible in thinking about, staying within the building and seeing how you can kind of move dollars over from a savings into another category, right?
You said you can't move projects from one to another, so for middle school, if we wanted to add the fields.
Yep.
It makes sense, so $3 million roughly for all the fields. And we'd have to
We'd have to find that savings, right, part.
within that project.
Within that, but again, remember you're gonna have 24 of ineligible costs anyways. So how you spend that money is, they're just saying you have an approval for X by this school.
I understand.
If you didn't, I'm not going to suggest this, but if you decided that the fields were the most important thing, you might want to, then you might go back and look at the rest of your base projects and say, okay, we're not going to spend every single dollar that we said we were, because we know that the fields are important. Because again, you have $141 million, right? That's all you have. How you move it vertically is still your choice. It's just, you couldn't do more work at, if Fishing Cove was approved for 6.7, you can't spend more on Fishing Cove without getting some adjustment on your approval. You can certainly spend more on your alts, because they're ineligible anyways, right? So or your alts for your middle school. So there is fluidity, it's just you can't go higher than what that approval number is. And given that we're striving for as high of an eligibility as possible in the CIP, but we know there's a huge gap in eligibility on the middle school, it becomes a little bit more fluid.
I just said, I think you mentioned this, but I don't know if you mentioned this before. We'll probably carry the fields as alternates all the way to bid.
Yeah.
Some of those others will have to make those decisions because they're more
Like the geothermal.
more ripple through the design. So, you know, it won't just be the estimate; it'll be the actual hard bids that come in, and so we do see numbers getting a little tighter when you get to the hard bids. So.
And I would say fields, especially additional site work, ancillary site improvements. I'm not saying fields are ancillary, but like they happen at the end. So you're also able to evaluate, okay, where did all the budget line items come in? How much do we have left in contingency? Can we plan to make sure those are coming in? And because they're at the end of the job, certainly easier to bring in than, say, the geothermal, right? You got to make that decision pretty early, like in the next phase of design. But fields are and exterior improvements outside of the core, circulation, parking, pedestrian, all that kind of stuff, often sit on an alts list because you're at pre-schematic, you're trying to kind of sort through all these costs. And as you move through that design process, how do you pull them back in? Or even after you've awarded bid, are there dollars that are available that you can then do that work at the end of the project? So that'll be a constant conversation that we'll be having internally, and then also with this group as we're kind of evolving through the pricing, through the design process. But at least they're designed all the way through the design process. They're not sitting on the outside. Whereas opposed to the CIP alts, those are not going to be designed at this stage because they're, you know, it's an additional 57 minus 14, so that's, you know, $43 million of additional work that can't fit in that scope. So a little bit of a different way that you have to kind of look at it between the new construction and the CIP.
One more question. So for like do you have a roadmap for like when we need to make decisions on like CM and PLA? Because those are high dollar items that are going to come up real quick.
Soon.
Yeah.
We would want to jump into those conversations like probably at our next meeting. So
That's
I would
what I
say
figured,
our October meeting, we would come to this group with kind of a pros and cons on procurement approach. I think on the PLA, it's really this group making a decision to hire the consultant to do the feasibility. You could decide that as soon as you're ready, and I don't know who has to make that call, but you have to do that study before you can even consider the PLA. So that is as much of a kind of a governance decision-making process. You know, the district or whoever would, or the school committee or whoever can make that decision tomorrow if they want it. We're certainly available to have that conversation with the ownership team again, just to say, okay, here's the steps that you need to take. Here we think this is how long it'll take. I would say the PLA we have a little bit more time on.
Yeah, the CM.
Yeah.
Got it.
CM is, we would say, present in October. If the decision was, yes, we'd like to go out for that form of procurement, then we would be ramping up with the RFQ process and hopefully be able to make that selection by end of, sometime in November maybe, if we're really quick.
So looking at the construction manager has an estimate of 1.8 million as an add-on. So that's not in that 141 right now.
Correct.
So obviously we have to have some type of procurement process, right?
Yep.
So that is an add-ons, but it's also a requirement. In a way.
Not necessarily, no. I mean, when we give you the pros and cons, you guys may say, look, we understand the value that CM brings. We're gonna stay with a lump sum bid, which is what your base bid assumes.
So if we decide to go with it and say we prefer that, then we need to start looking at savings right away. In the long run, to see what's.
Or how we're gonna talk about it is when you bring that CM in, they're gonna help you get the budget,
Right, to
right?
get-
So
yeah.
that's the value of them being at the table.
It's kind of where I was driving the conversation, because, I see the merits of the CM in my experience. Obviously, I think it's always better to have them at the table, but it's hard to sell to the community when we're gonna spend $2 million on something that they don't ever actually see, physically in the building. So I just wanna make sure that discussion, it sounds like you got it teed up for next meeting, which makes sense. Because I do see the merits. They're gonna present a lot more ad alternates, a lot more, value engineering.
Value engineering, yep.
They're gonna be big on that.
They're gonna blow our list away, by the way.
And also, they're gonna bring, we'll have higher price confidence, in 9 months. Nothing against the estimating team, but,
Yeah.
but it's just the truth.
It's different. Yeah, and again, we've built both ways. We think both ways can be very successful. But, I think we'll present you guys with our evaluation and our comments on it, and then you guys can really kind of take that to heart and say, okay, which way would we fit? And the one, the 1.8, whatever the number is, that is just, it's really at the end of the day, that's a percentage. So what the estimators have done, they said, okay, we've looked at GC projects, we've looked at CM projects. We believe the premium is X, it's a few points, and that's how they got to that. That is, it's no more scientific than that exact evaluation. And you don't pay that all up front.
Yeah, the pre-con's not gonna be anywhere near that.
No. The pre-con is probably a couple $100K.
Yeah.
That 1.8 is what you're absorbing over the course of the project, because that CM is kind of at the table. So it's not like you have to stroke a check for 1.2 million.
The PLA also is like a percentage.
Yeah. Same approach.
Same idea.
And again, not perfect.
Right.
But it's, kind of market data that says, okay, non-PLA versus PLA, this is kind of what you're using. And we're somewhat agnostic on it, we're not trying to say go one way or the other.
With the PLA, I know you've told us this a million times. Do we have to go out for an RFP?
No, so the PLA would be, you go out and you hire your consultant.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
For the consultant, do you,
We can talk about
Okay.
it. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple different ways, like, we've gone out and, in other communities, we've absorbed that, or we've built that cost in as reimbursable. So we certainly can do that. That's where we would stop, though, because we have no liability of that decision-making process. But that could be a way to do it, or you have to go out to like 2 or 3 attorneys and kind of get a number and figure it out that way. So it's really, it can go either way. If you RFP, it'll take a little bit more time.
okay.
And again, that can be, that's got a little bit more time frame on it. Doesn't have to be, we can continue to kind of carry those premiums and the estimates that we get in the future. I think it would be good to have that decision made by the conclusion of schematic design, which is targeted for end of November.
November 14th, it goes to this estimator.
Yeah. And even if you haven't selected them yet, if you know that it's a definite, then it's just easier to kind of plan on the estimating side. And if you did bring in the CM, then the CM would make that assumption too when they do their costs. But just one of the little sneak peek, if you did bring the CM in, then the estimate that Alana just did, CM does their own estimate too, and then you reconcile the both. Then you do that 3 times as you go through the project. So that's really where you get that value, because you get 2 different opinions and costs. Everybody comes together, we fight, we debate, and then we kind of come up with a reconciled cost estimate at each step. So that is one of the potential positives, pros that come out of that process.
And just in general, when are the next 3 cost estimate steps approximately? Like middle of stage 3 or?
Let's go to the calendar.
Depends on the project.
When or what?
Is it just an overall, like in,
Yep.
in 6 months from now,
Yeah,
the next cost estimate comes in?
I don't have it broken down, but I'd say the completion, and it's a little bit different for the CIP versus the new middle school, but if we just talk about the middle school, mid-November, the full schematic design would go to the estimators.
60%?
60, or design development's probably mid-spring,
Yeah.
and then the final set would be late summer. And each of those steps, you're gonna get a whole new round of estimating, updating of the budget, that would go through that process. And that last step would be right before you go out to bid, or if you had a CM, you'd be working with the CM through that whole process.
Okay. So we're in the middle of a motion.
Sorry. Oh, jeez.
I know, we, does anyone have any other questions or anything else for discussion? Should we take the vote?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Abstentions? That was a unanimous approval of that.
Yes.
Before we end, I do want to bring up, and we've had conversations, I know you've done some work on the walls. Can we just spend a few minutes just kind of talking about that? I don't know, unless you don't have it with you.
I don't know if we had the slide, but
No, we don't have the slide, but
we could definitely talk about it.
okay. I know we don't have the cost estimate, but you did work with the cost estimate to get some numbers.
We did. After the last meeting with the school committee, they asked us to go back. We reached out to Alana and asked their opinion, basically. We had done sort of that order of magnitude when we presented to both the building committee and the school committee in August. We had them look at it. The trade cost that they came up with was very close to our $350 a square foot. I don't remember the number offhand, but it escalation and some of the other multipliers that they put on for general conditions and such were higher than what we had come up with. And where we were anywhere from 30 to 32 million, they thought we were more like 40 to 42 million in total for
And
those
that-
3 buildings alone.
Construction cost only.
Construction cost only. So just in terms of, trying to get your arms around the enormity of the problem, that's sort of where we are. The reality is probably somewhere between our two numbers, but it's still something that's not within your means, quite frankly.
And I think they did a line by line on per square foot cost,
They
which I
did.
think is useful, but they did not estimate what the total cost would be.
The total came in at like 500 and change a square foot. And why that's relevant for this conversation, again, is when you talk about the eligible cost from RIDE for new construction for an elementary school, and the delta between the two, now all of a sudden you're getting really close to that in terms of starting a hard evaluation on that particular building and saying, does this amount of investment make sense
In an existing building.
in an existing building that's an impossible phasing task, quite frankly? So, that's sort of on the master plan level relative to the long-term plan of each one of those buildings. But knowing that you have it at 3 out of the 6, I think is pause to say that the plan that's in front of you that you voted on tonight is actually a good way to move this forward.
Well, I think it's also important to remind everyone
There you go.
that, as was brought up during public
Thank
comment, that the original estimate that was given was about $8.2 million, I think about 2 years ago. So it's not even in the ballpark.
No, and at $516.60 was his number,
Per square foot?
per square foot.
And I think you had said the square footage from before was like $126 a square foot or something. Not yours.
I think it was
what they were
somewhere in that
basing-
neighborhood. Mine was like 4 and change with all the little multipliers put on. Again, just order of magnitude, but when you look at the extent of the square footages involved,
Yeah, I think you were at 77,000 square feet-ish.
correct,
Yeah, right on the
77,639 was the total
Total
amount of
impact,
square
so you
footage.
multiply that by that.
And as I, ex-
560.
as I explained at that school committee meeting, this is an intensive gut renovation. This isn't just, throw some walls up and deal with the finishes kind of an exercise.
I think for tomorrow night's purpose, it's important to have a slide so we can
For that?
discuss this tomorrow night. It's gonna come up, and I think it's important that we go back with the information that was gathered.
No, I mean, it's just the facts. It's
And
important.
I
to put old
specifically showed Stoney because when we had that discourse the last time, this is the most complicated building to try and make work because it's a 3-track school. And to try and fit all those classrooms in here with no exterior windows, that whole north side is pinned in, it's landlocked. These are spaces that no one really wants to occupy. They're lousy spaces. So you're spending top dollar in difficult phase construction to get substandard space. I think that's sort of the operative where even if you were to look at the property, which we never really did, but and said, well, does it make sense to build a new building on the other side of the property? Is there the ability to do that, given, you know, wetland setbacks and other, you know, parameters? That's something that you should look at in the future. And I think the other thing I'll say is, you know, one-story buildings are nice for the younger age group, but given the sizes of the lots that are currently in your care and custody, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
A two-story
So,
building would be
vertical.
more economical from a site utilization standpoint. But again, that's a,
Long-term.
yeah, long-term.
Thank you.
You're
Just want to
welcome.
make sure we discussed it.
Not a problem.
Any other questions or
Eric.
comments? Questions from the committee? No? Okay, that brings us to the end, and I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks.